Okay, week number 7 of our online advanced finance task for this summer. Not too many weeks left. That's pretty good for you guys. Our topic tonight, as I mentioned in my introduction video of yesterday, is strategies that drive capital decision making. And again, to refresh our memories, since it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, capital decision making is to borrow money, issue stock, take profits from prior years, and invest it in an asset that's going to produce a return greater enough to pay back the borrowing of money or the investment from the shareholders, and produce an additional return so the company continue to grow and develop their business. That's a capital decision making. Where to get the money, where to invest it, what is an adequate return? The Electrics Incorporated case is a case where you're going to be answering those questions. This week in case number 3, you're going to be doing that analysis in a spreadsheet. And the last time we met, we looked at this in this format, if you can remember, where we had a description of the capital budget process. We took a look at the cost of capital, the weighted average cost of capital, which is what's our cost of getting the capital to invest in the asset. Then we did what is called a base analysis, what we think is going to happen with that investment and the returns it plans on making over the expected depreciable life of that asset. And we did this. And we determined and looked at the 4 methods of determining return: net present value, internal rate of return, profitability index, and payback. These 4 are all ways of determining a strategy of capital investment. They tell us the profitability of an investment in dollars, percent, ratio, and in years, of how we recoup the cost of the investment into the future. Happens all the time. And in this case that we looked at a couple weeks back, we invested $1 million. Our cost of capital was almost about 9%. And we had these various variables: selling price, number of units sold, depreciable life and yearly depreciation, inflation rates for selling price, variable cost, and fixed cost, tax rate of the particular business, and the working capital amount that we need to, in addition to the investment, to be able to get the asset off its ground and maintain that asset over its life. And we put together a 10-year analysis of cash flow. And the definition of cash flow in finance is net income, net accounting income, plus salvage value after taxes, plus adding back depreciation, and subtracting working capital as it affects the asset over the life of the asset, and then adding back the working capital in the final year of the investment as you recoup those costs. The combination of accounting income and other cash vehicles, salvage, depreciation, working capital, gives us the bottom line in finance, called the net cash flow. The bottom line in accounting basically is the accounting income. But in finance, we're not concerned about accounting income. We're concerned about how much actual cash is being generated by this investment. So we did that analysis. You're going to be doing this in case number 3. You're going to be doing this in the electrics case. It's a basic analysis of a financial capital decision making. But then we went a step further. We talked about this in my lecture video of last week. We decided, well, what is the risk associated with this original plan, this base case plan? What are the risks? Are we going to be able to sell 25,000 units a year? Are these key variables like selling price, variable cost, cost of capital? How could they be affected by the market or the economy we're in going out into the future? It's called a risk analysis. And we looked at that last week where we put together what is called a scenario analysis, which is taking a look at the probability of different output levels throughout the 10-year life of the project. We weighted that by the probability and to determine a weighted average NPV under the scenario analysis, taking a look at average or base case analysis, strong economic analysis, and a weak economic analysis on output. Scenario analysis is based on outputs. Then we took a look at sensitivity analysis, which takes a look at changing a deviation of percentages of key variables and how those deviations in the percentages affect NPV. And we did it for selling price per unit, variable cost per unit, and the weighted average cost of capital. And we found a different stream of profitability. Naturally, if we reduce selling price, we make less profit. If we increase variable costs, we make less profit. If we increase selling price, we make more profit. If we decrease the cost of capital, we make more profit. If we increase the cost of capital, we make less profit. And I put it into an analysis of the line analysis of looking at the steepness of the lines, selling price, variable cost, weighted average cost, and notice selling price has the steeper line, and that can correlate to this number here. From top to bottom, the differential of cash, 736,000 compared to 293 and 190 top to bottom. Thus, the slope of the selling price per unit line is steeper. Well, that's pretty well common sense. I know you don't even really need to do analysis. Yeah, Mr. Hasse, if I decrease my selling price, I'm going to make less profit. If I increase my selling price, I'm going to make more profit. Okay. But now you've done the analysis and see the length and the width of the deviations, and it gives you a good analysis. I can still, if I want to sell 25,000 units a year, I can reduce my selling price by 15% and still make a profit. Or if my cost of money changes during the course of the life of this investment, I can still make a pretty substantial profit. And even if my variable costs increase, I'm still making a pretty good profit. This is not only a risk analysis at the time of year 0 of the project analysis, but it also gives you an idea that if numbers do change in the future, how will that affect the bottom line, net present value? In order to sell, I might have to drop my price. But if your Apple computer, or if you're, hang on, I got to turn off somebody's mic. There we go. If your Apple computer or a company that does not, has the luxury of increasing their selling price and still sell a lot of product, you can really see how much more additional money you're going to make if you maintain that output and you can get away in the market of selling it at a higher price. Can you imagine what they're thinking about at the drug companies now around the world as they start, hopefully, knock on wood, please find a vaccine for the COVID-19 virus? Can you imagine how much profit they're going to make off that vaccine? And can you imagine what they're doing now in the models of how much money they've expended to develop the vaccine and how fast they can maybe perhaps get that money back from that investment? You know, yes, what this vaccine will probably happen in the real world once it's developed is countries will buy the vaccine, not individual people, but countries. Oh, put me in for 1 billion vaccines. Put me in for 500 million so I can have a good stock for my population. The amount of profits that are going to be made is astronomical. So this analysis of risk tells us how different our numbers look if we make changes. Changes in output, changes in key variables of the analysis. After our break, we'll look at case number 3 for this coming week. You're going to have to do exactly the same thing. The numbers have been changed to protect the innocent. You're going to be doing the same thing. You're going to be looking at putting together a base analysis, determining the cost of capital, putting together that base analysis, and then doing a risk analysis, scenario, and sensitivity based on the variables given to you in the problem. You're doing the same thing. In the electrics case, you're doing the same thing. Here it is here. I hope most of you have read this. It's a two-prong attack. You're doing a spreadsheet analysis of determining profitability, beginning with the average base case scenario. And then when you do the scenario analysis, you have to adjust the numbers for the strong case and the weak case, just like we saw in our example. You're going to have to put together the capital budget analysis of determining all the proper selling prices, number of units sold, cost per unit, fixed cost, cost per unit, and determine the net cash flow. The only difference between this electrics case and the problem we just looked at and the case number 3 that you're doing this next week is this: warranty cost. Warranty cost. This is what separates you guys as MBA students from the bachelor's administration students. Many of you did in your 500D class probably a case similar to this. It's called California Best Trucks. It's called, I can't remember all of them. And the only thing that's different in this case to that one is this warranty calculation and the risk analysis. So if you want to go back and take a look at those, be my guest. But here's a cost that says, remember this problem, I hope all of you read this, this problem is to determine should this company build an electric motor that they can install in automobiles, because they see by the energy crisis, they see by the environment that electric motor is the wave of the future. So they're developing a product that could be put into automobiles or anything. And the electric motor is made up of labor, parts, and then what is called a controller. This is the difference between the two products. One has this controller at $1,280 per unit and $90 warranty cost. And the other product is this controller at $1,260 a unit and $100 warranty. Your job is to do the analysis for these two products. So let me count the number of spreadsheets you'll be doing. For this controller, CTX13, you'll be doing an average base case analysis. That's 1. 2, You'll be doing a strong case analysis scenario. That's 2. You'll be doing a weak scenario analysis. That's 3. And then you'll be doing a sensitivity analysis based on the variables given to you in the rubric. So you're doing those 1, 2, 3, 4 for sensitivity times 2, 8 spreadsheets. And you put them all in one file with specific tabs. That's your appendix. That's your work that you're showing to answer these 9 questions, and this is your paper. Your paper is to answer these questions, and many of it is based on the data that you do here. So I had a couple of students this past week ask me some questions because they read the case and they had some questions. And you're basically giving me 2 files. A Word or a PDF file that is your paper in APA format, and a spreadsheet file with individual tabs showing me your calculations for these numbers. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, including the sensitivity analysis. But you're probably going to have to do a spreadsheet to show me how you came up with these average warranty cost numbers, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And you're probably going to have to do a spreadsheet to tell me how you determine the cost of capital based on this information. So your spreadsheet is going to have a lot of tabs, and you need to sort that all out. My advice is you work on the average base scenario for each one of the 2 products, and then you just copy those spreadsheets once they get done and just adjust them to the weak and the strong cases. That's how you would do it. But let's get back to the details of this case. You do have to determine the net present value, the internal rate of return, the profitability index, and the payback in years of this product, CTX13, versus this product, MT78. And you'll have to put a spreadsheet together just like we just saw, and just like what you're going to practice in the case 3 this next week, of making sure you properly show the net accounting income and the net cash flow every year. How many years of the project are there? They just tell you right here. The project life is 8 years. Now you know how many years you have. And there's 0 salvage value. So you don't have to worry about salvage value in year 8. But I balance out that easiness of that by telling you that the depreciation used is that. Marginal accelerated cost recovery system. That's what you have to find out. What does that mean, and how do I calculate that for this problem? That is in your textbook. There is that part, that description in your textbook. Also, you can just go to Wikipedia. No, don't go to Wikipedia, excuse me. Investopedia. God, if you go to Wikipedia, I'll smack you. Investopedia, Google, and just type in MACRS, and it'll give you that information. You can go to the Internal Revenue Service website and type in MACRS. Put in the length of your project life, and they'll give you that information as well. So yes, there's no salvage value, so you don't have to worry about that. You know the project life is 8 years, but you have to come up with that depreciation. There's a whole lot of stuff going on here. Let's go back to the warranty. All these values up here are per unit. $4,250 per unit. And $2,500 per unit. This is a fixed cost, $9.5 million. So that's not per unit, that's a fixed cost. $1,280 per unit. If you're producing $40,500, excuse me, 40,500 units, you can do the math. That times that, total dollars. That times that, total dollars. That times that, total dollars. Cool. But now this is where this gets very important. The warranty cost says we have a warranty on the motor and the controller. $75 a year on the motor, $90 a year for this controller, $100 a year for this controller. But the warranty is for 5 years at $75 a year, $90 a year, $100 a year. Why? Because if I'm a customer of Electrics Incorporated and I purchase this motor, I have a 5-year warranty. From the date of the purchase, I have 5 years. After 5 years, I don't get my money back. I don't get it fixed. This company has estimated that for this product, the motor with the CTX, it's $165 a year for 5 years. They're estimating the cost to provide that warranty. For this product, MT78, they're determining it's $175 a year for 5 years to determine that warranty. Every product produced every year for 8 years has a 5-year warranty. I'll say that one more time. If you produce a product in year 1, it has a 5-year warranty. You produce a product in year 8, it has a 5-year warranty. Wait a minute, Mr. Hassey. How do I, if it's only an 8-year project and I produce it in 8 years, it's going to go out beyond the 8 years, the cost. Well, this is where you have to put on your MBA thinking cap. How do I incorporate 5 years of cost into one number? And that's important because all of you have taken accounting at some shape or form during your life. Basic principles of accounting is revenue and expense recognition. You expense and match the expenses with the revenue in every year of that product. So if I'm producing a product in 2020, I'm going to have revenue of $9,200 a unit. I'm going to have $4,250 per unit expense, $2,500 per unit expense, $9.5 million expense, $1,280 expense, but I have 5 years of warranty for $165. That means I have to take those 5 years and put them into one number so they can be in the 2020 expenses. My revenue recognition and matching principle says I have to do that, or I'm doing something wrong in my books. I'm making expenses go out longer when the product has already been produced and sold in 2020. And here is the hint in the case that it gives you to calculate this. The average warranty cost per electric motor for the first 5 years is $75. The present value of this cost will be used as a cost figure for each motor. For the controller, the average annual warranty cost per year for 5 years is $90 for this version, $100 for this version. That means you're going to use the present value of those costs to determine the one single cost per year of the warranty. That, along with determining your cost of capital, probably are the two most difficult parts of this case to put it together. But really, and I'm not saying this to be a jerk, and you guys are going to think I am, but when this is all said and done and you look at this, it's very easily determined. It makes sense. The investment is $17 million. That's your investment. You're spending $17 million in year zero. How much is that $17 million costing you? This is where that is given. You have to determine the capital structure of this company, the cost of after-tax cost of debt, and the cost of equity. The tax rate for this company is 35%, and the inflation rate is 3% across the board. Remember in the problem we did 2 weeks ago? You had inflation at 2%, 2.5%, 1%. Here in this problem, it's 3% for everybody. So your job probably you do the case 3 this week, but after this next week, your job is to begin to put together the spreadsheets to determine these numbers. Now I'm going to make a deal with you. You put together the average cost scenario spreadsheet, and I'll let you know if you're on the right track. You put together the average base case analysis for these 2 products, and I'll tell you if you're yay or nay, and then you can go forward. With that information, you can do the sensitivity analysis, and then you know you're on the right track to determine the 2 different scenario analysis. I won't look at anything else. You put that together and I'll tell you yay or nay. By looking at that, I'll be able to see if you figured this warranty cost correctly. I'll be able to see that you determined the depreciation correctly. And I'll be able to see that you determined the cost of capital. If you give me that one spreadsheet, I'll go through it and look at it. But don't send it to me on Saturday night, August 15th at midnight when it's due the next day. I would probably put a timeline in this within the next 2 weeks, because you got to get all these numbers done, all these different tabs in the spreadsheet done before you can answer these questions. Now, you don't really need the spreadsheets to do this question, but all the rest of them you do. Okay? Here are your 2 sensitivity variables. A lot of times students panic. Mr. Hansey, where is this? Using the average demand scenario to evaluate the sensitivity of the project's net present value with respect to the sales price of the electric motor and the cost of the controller. There's your 2 sensitivity variables. The selling price and the cost of the controller. But be careful there. What's the cost of the controller? The total cost of the controller is the installation and the unit plus the warranty costs. So you got to do some combining of numbers there to come up with that cost of controller. I'm saying way too much here. I shouldn't have had that 2 beers at lunchtime today. I get 2 motor mouth and I'm giving you too much information. I didn't have 2 beers. I wish I had 2 beers. That's the electric case. It's a 2-parter. Understand what the company's trying to do. Understand what you have to do by these 9 questions. And then going ahead and doing the physical number crunching of the analysis. You should set it up, I would, like this. Use the spreadsheet that we did a week ago. Everything's here except the numbers are different, and you're going to have to add a couple extra lines. You're going to have to add a line for the warranty cost. Keep that separate. You won't have a salvage value line. Your depreciation is going to be not straight line, it's going to be that MACRS. But this format is basically the same. You find these variables and insert it. It's only going to be an 8-year project, not 10, but you can use this as your base. But be careful if you do use it as a base, make sure you swipe it clean and start from scratch and use that template and then recreate it. That's the best way of doing it. And also you have the analysis here for scenario and sensitivity. You just have to change the variables per the problem. These percentages are located in your rubric. That's the electrics case. I think I explained this to you guys last time, but this is called our assessment case. What does this mean? In order for us to give you a degree in 1 year, 2 years, 6 months, whenever you guys are graduating with an MBA degree from Laverne, I don't know if anyone's ever explained this to you, but in order for us to put President Lieberman and sign her name on the diploma, and for Professor Hassey and all the professors that you've had to sign their names and saying, Wendy Lester has completed her studies of the MBA degree. In order for us to say that and be accredited in finance, you have to do this case. This is an accreditation case. Every MBA student that I know of, from Harvard to USC to Pepperdine to UCLA to Chapman to UC Riverside, anybody who takes an MBA degree has got to do this. It's part of the accredited requirement. So don't think I'm picking on you here. Everybody's got to do it. This tells the accreditation board that you have completed an interpretation of a capital investment and were able to explain it and write about it and calculate it in this format. So this is part of your MBA requirement. If any of you go into financial analysis or any type of finance or business side of a company, one of the questions somebody's going to ask, oh, here's your resume. Oh, I see you have an MBA degree. Could you explain to me what a capital budget analysis is? Somebody's going to ask you that. You know, we're having trouble with our capital budgeting here. We think we're using poor data. How can we go about fixing that? I had that question asked of me by J.P. Morgan in the summer of 1980. And I bullshitted enough to get the job. No, I shouldn't say that. And I got the job. But they asked me that question because I had a professor in my MBA school tell me, Rick, they're going to ask you this question when you go down to New York City and apply to JP Morgan. They're going to ask you that question. You better be ready. Thank you, Professor Fitzpatrick. He saved my butt. So that's why we do this. All right. And yes, it's a pain in the neck. Yes, if you're not a numbers or an accounting person, this can be a challenge, but you got to do it. It tells the world, if you complete this class, that you have completed a requirement for accreditation as an MBA graduate. Very important. And here's what this even means even more, and I shouldn't be telling you this. I have to take your papers when this is all done and send them to the dean's office for review. So they make sure that I did my job in teaching you this techniques. Every class has to be reviewed. Now, that's not going to influence you guys. The grade I give you is the grade I give you. But I'll get reamed by everybody if I do this incorrectly and they're not very happy with the quality of your papers. Not to put any pressure on you, but that's how it works. But you guys should know this. Every class in the 600 level that you're taking at the University of Laverne MBA program at the 600 level is filling a requirement for accreditation. And I'm sure you guys want to know that when you get out of here, this piece of paper, a diploma, kind of means something. If it doesn't, why are you wasting your time and money? And that's important to know as well. That's the electrics case. So what I would like you to do, I know you have some other work to do this week, and I'm going to show you that after our break. But I know you have some other work to do this week with that case number 3, but I would begin to put this together. Put the spreadsheets together. Do the average base case scenario. Begin to get the data. See where you maybe have a problem that you have to. This is going to be, you have to do this a disciplined format, because if you do it piecemeal over a plan of 5 weeks and you're not consistent, you're going to get confused and you're going to have a lot of holes in it. That's part of the assessment, is see how you are disciplined enough as a finance MBA student to put this together in a logical, interpretive way. Okay, enough of this nonsense. We will come back to this every week. Next week, anybody got any questions on the electrics case? Yes, Mr. Hassey, do you have any Valium? I need it. No. So every week I will ask you questions. Every week in our office hours, that's a good time to come and say, Mr. Hassey, help. Show me your average case scenario and I'll let you know that you're on the right track. Okay. Now, in addition to that, a large portion of this case is interpretation. What does it tell you? Is my conclusion making sense? What am I telling the Electrics Incorporated people what they should do? Yeah, you just show them the numbers, okay. But am I giving them decent interpretation of the data? That's the paper, by answering those 9 questions. I'm sure many of you in your academic studies have studied and used SWOT. Strength, weakness, opportunity, threats. Okay? SWOT. You could do a SWOT analysis about the Dodgers, or you can do a SWOT analysis about this capital budget electrics case. What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in your organization as a result of this financial decision? Maybe some of you even do this in your own companies now. Another approach to that strategy is called the Balance Scorecard. That's why I gave you this article. Some companies say, you know, we're going to have this division of our organization do a SWOT analysis, and we're going to have this division do a Balance Scorecard analysis, and let's see what they show us. 2 distinct ways of measuring performance and strategy, and if they're going to work in it. And the Balance Scorecard is taking a look at an analysis from different perspectives, where strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, those are those perspectives for that specific task. Here, it's the financial perspective, the customer perspective, the internal business perspective within the organization, and the innovation and learning perspective. Ooh. Are we creating value and are we growing the company? Are we looking out for the shareholders? Is this going to be customer value? Or the customer, you ever get a product sometimes and everybody says, oh, you got to get this product, this is great. So you go out and buy it and you order it and you can't figure the damn thing out. What the hell is this supposed thing to do? They're telling me how to do it. I don't understand what's going on. The product is too confusing for the customer. They don't know what they're getting. That'll turn off a lot of people. So this Balance Scorecard approach gives us a different perspective by which we can look at an analysis of a project. So it's good for us to take a look at that and understand what SWOT is and what the Balance Scorecard is. I'm sure SWOT is kind of a no-brainer. You probably have done it enough. Geez, I was doing SWOT in high school. Oof. But this Balance Scorecard has just been developed over the last few years, 10 years, I guess. And it takes a look at customer, internal, innovation, shareholders or investors. It takes a look in those different areas. Is this project satisfying all four of those, or is it helping three and we're leaving the customers out to dry? Well, if you need customer growth, that's a bad strategy. Can you use Balance Scorecard in Electric's case? Sure, as a way of determining your conclusion. You can also use a SWOT if you're more familiar with that. But there's now two different methods, and that's why I had you read this. We're looking at performance, investment performance, internal performance, external or customer performance, and innovation and creating value for growth in the future. Companies like Amazon, Apple, Cisco, even Tesla are measuring their performance with their analysts on are they satisfying these measures in the products they're producing. And it's even more difficult now in our economy now with COVID. We're working from home. We're losing track of our customers. We're losing track of the economy. We don't know really where we stand. There's too many unknowns. And that's proving a very difficult thing for companies to manage these days. I mean, every time you turn around, you see another company going bankrupt or closing. Every time you turn around, you hear a company trying to find or to cut costs so much so they can maintain the profit margin of their company, but at the same time, they're losing the integrity of their workers by laying them all off. A lot of things going on here. So Balance Scorecard is a very important measure that I want you to be familiar with. Stephen says, hey, professor, so we answer 9 questions by doing either a SWOT or a Balance Scorecard? No. The SWOT or the Balance Scorecard is your review of the conclusion. Not the 9 questions are parts of the conclusion. But let's say you recommend a certain product and you've put all the data together. Is your product or is your conclusion have strength? What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of that conclusion? What are the customer, investor, internal, learning perspectives of your conclusion? Is the company gaining by that? That's the final, that's part of your concluding. And now I believe that is question number 9. Let me go back up here. Let me see this. Would you recommend that Electrics accept or reject the project? What is the basis for your recommendation? Boom. There's where you put this analysis. Okay. Okay, Stephen? Very good. Now, guys, I know this seems, for some of you, and especially for the people who are not in class tonight who are actually hearing this, because it's going to be a little bit different when they see the recording, this might be a little bit overwhelming. It's not. You guys can do this. You wouldn't be this far in your MBA program or your academic career if you can't do this. Trust me, you can do this. You just got to think. You can't just do cut and paste. The days of cut and paste are over. You got to think. Every question requires analysis and thinking, research, finding the numbers. That's why you can't do this on the last weekend of the class. Oh, I'm going to start August 13th on Mr. Hassey's electric case. Oh, I think I'll start that today. It's due on Sunday at midnight. I can get it done. You won't get an A. Unless your last name is Buffett. You won't get an A. Trust me. I've seen students try that before. Okay. There's that. Another article I had you read, and now I'm going to call on some victims here. Teresa Rodney, what is an advantage of using net present value method? What is an advantage to doing that?
An advantage of using the net present value is identifying what your return on investment is. You can see how long it'll take.
How long it will take?
Or you can project if it's not a good investment.
Okay, that's a B answer, Teresa. That's a B. Excuse me, a B minus answer. All right, well that's okay. And net present value tells you in dollars. That's a key one. In dollars. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you. Appreciate it. In dollars, what our return is as of today, the year we're making the investment, year zero. It's telling us our dollar return after we take into account the cost of money and all the variables over the life, depreciable life of that investment class, that project. It tells us in dollars today, are we making a return? Now, the downside of that, the negative side of that is, what if I, excuse my French ladies, what if I screw up the numbers going out into the future? What if all those are bogus? The number it's giving me today could be meaningless. That's the danger of net present value. You got to make sure the data is sound, and that's why we lead into scenario and risk analysis, but also there's a danger there. Remember, the value of your return on investment is determined by three things. The dollar amount of the investment, the projected cash flow over the life of that investment, and the risk associated with that investment. Somebody might come up to Stephen today and say, Stephen, I got an investment for you. We're going to invest $10 billion into investment, and here are the projected cash flows, and we look like a net present value today of about $1.5 billion on this investment. Stephen goes, wow, what's the investment in? Oh, a nuclear power plant on the San Andreas Fault in Bakersfield. Really? Really? Now, because Stephen is a smart guy and has taken finance and has an MBA degree, he'll go, well, that's a great profit, but guys, it's on the San Andreas Fault in Bakersfield. A little risky, don't you think? Should we really think about this? Is that enough of that investment enough of return? Sitting on that maybe in 6 hours, this sucker could cut loose, or maybe in 8 years it could cut loose. Is that worth it? That's the downside of net present value. What is the risk associated with this project that's generating this net present value? That's an important concept. Very important. You know, can I say this story? I can say this story. How old am I? What year is this? 2020? Okay. 42 years ago, I made the commitment of getting married. All right. That for me, sorry to give it in financial terms, ladies, that was a financial investment, a commitment, getting married. And my father, immediately when I told him I was getting married, he goes, son, have you looked at the downside risk on this? He sounds just like a businessman. You know, Dad, I have, and it's okay. This person is the one for me. Boy, did I make the right decision. But in any decision looking into the future, money, personal, whatever, the numbers are one thing, but what's the risk in the future? What's the risk out there? That's an important concept. That's something you guys got to look at in the electrics case. This company is making this decision. If you read that analysis, it's making the decision based on that the market is changing. People no longer want to use fossil fuel vehicles. So let's get ahead of this. Let's get a piece of that market. they're betting that on the future says it's going to get worse every year. The dependent on fossil fuels is going to be worse every year because of the environment, because of sustainability of that uh, cost. So that's why we're doing this. The risk is on our side. That's why it's a good investment. Geez, I just gave part of the answer. What a knucklehead. But whatever. So that's what I mean by that. That's the downside of net present value. What is the risk associated with that? And then finally, Jessica Lopez. Jessica Lopez. Jessica, have you ever been in a company or with an organization or even in your own family when somebody decides to change something? You want to change something. You know what? We're going to have dinner from now on at 7 o'clock instead of 6. What? Then I won't be able to watch my show. Or, you know what? We're going to fire 10 individuals from this division because it's not performing well. How to implement a new strategy without disrupting an organization. There's a couple things talked about in this article about how to do that correctly, Jessica. What is one strategy to use? So if you decide to make a change, like changing the dinner hour at home, or changing or firing people, what is one strategy to avoid disrupting an organization? Any idea?
The article talked about structure, like the organizational structure, so not messing too much with it.
Very good. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the best way to put that answer is not messing with the structure of the company by communicating your strategy. You ever sit in a meeting with some knucklehead boss who makes a decision and doesn't explain it, and you all walk out of the meeting going, what the hell did he say? What were we supposed to do? What's going on? And you go, well, maybe it was a great strategy or maybe it was a good point, but you walk out of there going, this has happened to me a lot at Laverne, I'll tell you that right now. But I shouldn't have said that. But you walk out of the meeting going, what the hell did they just say? Maybe they didn't even know what they just said. And that disrupts the organization. Communicating, knowing the structure of your company. Is your company centralized? A lot of businesses are run very like a pyramid, very centralized. Or some organizations or some managers like to run their companies, they're going every which way, decentralized. That's the way they like to run the company. Well, that type of organization demands communication, telling the people who are initiating the strategy what's going on. I tell you, one of the worst things a company can do is change course. And it might be a great strategy, but if they don't communicate or let people know why, when, and what they're doing, disaster. That's when it disrupts the organization. That's when you don't know, what, am I losing my job, or am I have to work different hours, or am I going to get a pay cut, or would somebody please let me know what's going on here? So that's very important. Another thing, another strategy that is very important, and especially these days, is, you know, a lot of companies are going to having their employees work from home, right? Work from home, or move their employees to a centralized location where they're all together. Some of them work from home, some of them are at the, or changing the way we do business within an organization. Well, that's great, but if you don't explain that or don't show that, and if it goes against the history or the culture of your organization, that could prove a disaster. Right now, here at the University of Laverne, a lot of people are working from home. And that's a good thing. But now, as we get closer to the new school year, a lot of people are getting very nervous. Am I going to have to go back to the campuses and work? How are we going to maintain this another semester or term in the fall? And that, as of now, July 21st, 20th, a lot of that communication has not been done yet. So it's causing a lot of uneasiness in the organization. I'm supposed to teach this class this coming fall, but the class is no longer going to be called 635, Managing Financial Resources. It's going to be called 630, Accounting and Finance Strategies for Business. As of now, just July 20th, I have no idea what the course outline is, what's the syllabus, and what the text we're going to use. Nobody has told me that yet. That's disrupting my organization. That's not good. They're not communicating. They're not thinking about that. So that's important. Another thing they talk about in this article is the concept of multinational corporations. A lot of our companies now are globalized, no central location. That's very difficult to manage. Languages, cultures, expensive and tough. Allocating costs, understanding the way the organization is functioning, difficult. And they use a great example of what kind of system, what kind of management system you need, and how has that changed over the course of time. Well, the work we're doing in the electrics case and the work we're doing in strategies of managing financial resources is, as a manager, if you do your homework and your research well enough, you can implement a strategy without getting people all nervous, disloyal, disruption. That's a key thing for a manager to do that. Not just sit in a meeting and say, oh guys, we're going to start doing it this way. Work it out. I'll be back in a month and we'll see how we're doing. Huh? What? Who? Where? Trouble. That's important to making strategic decisions. And I'm sure a lot of you deal with this in your own organizations, but also in your own personal life, family life, disrupting things when things change. This COVID-19 has changed a lot of things, caused a lot of confusion. How do you avoid that? You communicate. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back from our break, we'll take a look at case number 3, your specific work for this next week. And we'll take a look at another strategy involved with business, with capital, the concept of leasing assets, leasing people. And we're going to talk about that strategy when we come back. Leasing. Okay, I'll see you at, let's make it 7:15. We'll see you back here at 1:15. See you then. Okay. Okay. Our poll this evening was to determine all the following are reasonable capital strategies except for, I think the key word here is reasonable. Naturally, it's not internal rate of return. Naturally, it's not net present value. Naturally, it's not merger. I agree with all of you there. Now, there is an argument for bankruptcy as being the one, but really, sometimes a bankruptcy can be a very reasonable strategy because you have no other alternative. So it can be legitimate. So I would not rule out, I would not exclude bankruptcy. So that leaves us with SWOT and balance forward. And 9 or roughly half of our students have said this. And that I tend to agree with you there. I probably could have said either or, but these are not strategies, these are analysis. Okay? SWOT is an analysis. It's not a strategy. It tells us the result of a strategy. Balance forward is not a strategy, but it's a little bit more than, I guess you could say SWOT, but it really isn't. Balance forward is the interpretation of a strategy, how it affects those 4 key parameters or perspectives. So I guess the correct answer here is both SWOT and balance forward, because Mr. Hassey, they're not technically strategies. You're not going to walk in a meeting and say, well, my strategy is balance forward. Okay, I can understand why he's saying that because you have 4 different perspectives, but what's your strategy? What are you trying to do? So I would think a strategy for an internal rate of return, we're trying to have it the highest possible percentage return. Net present value, the strategy is to have the highest possible dollar return. Merger, the strategy is to incorporate our business in with somebody else for increased valuation. Bankruptcy, our strategy is to go to bankruptcy court and restructure. SWOT and balance forward are indicators of what's the result of a strategy analysis. So that's why I threw this question out. Kind of poorly worded, I apologize. But the correct answer is SWOT or balance forward, because the reason they're analysis, they're not strategies. Okay, so let me show you the results of this polling. And there they are right there. So thank you for participating in this non-grade fund poll that's showing us the different types of strategies with capital investment and what is not a strategy. And I guess SWOT and balance forward are 2 of the better answers because they're analysis of strategy, not strategy per se. And a lot of people would say bankruptcy is a strategy. Sure it is. Bankruptcy is a strategy because you're restructuring or you're liquidating. You're trying to get out the most value of the company, whatever's left. And I don't do that in this class, but some of you might have heard this lecture before of the circle of life in finance, the circle of life. A company starts out at midnight being born, a brand new company, entrepreneur, invested capital from yourself, your own money. And over the course of time, it grows into a private venture. You issue stock, you borrow money, you go to maximum value, then you merge or you consolidate, you keep that business model going, and that 11:50 p.m. of that night, of that day, the last strategy is to declare bankruptcy and see if you can last a little bit longer by restructuring, or you end it by liquidating. So bankruptcy is the end result of a company's circle of life, where you probably don't want to get to very quickly, but it's the last strategy that you can use, liquidation or restructuring. Okay, very good. Thank you for doing that. That's just a little different things that I like to throw at you to keep things interesting. Okay, we'll do another one next week. Now, here's the old Blackboard site. Oops, we changed this That's my look. Let me get it to your look. There it is. There's our Blackboard site. We now have a new case under the case study file folder. Capital budget risk analysis and interpretation. I'm looking for two formats here, two files, kind of like a prelude to the electrics case. A Word or a PDF file where you can answer the questions that I give you in the case, and they're very short answer questions. And you can even include them in your spreadsheet if you'd like. Or, and also a spreadsheet showing me the analysis. Okay. We still have this electrics case, which is right here. And if you have not read these documents yet, I strongly urge you to do so in the next week. But this case is due next Sunday at midnight, and it looks like this. I'm asking you to do a couple of things. Based on the inputs given, prepare a capital budget analysis for this base case using net present value, internal rate of return, profitability index, and payback in years. After you do that analysis in a spreadsheet, answer me these questions. Short answer. Don't have to write much. Is the net present value analysis a fair assessment of this project? Explain. Ooh. How does this capital budget risk analysis fit into a balance scorecard analysis? Ooh. Ooh. And finally, Wendy. All right. Wendy, you up? Wendy, you up? Okay, there you are. Okay. 3, would you recommend approval of this project? Explain. Does the risk analysis affect your decision? The only data you have here, excuse me, the only data you have here is the numbers. So there's no market indicators, that sort of thing. But would you, after you go through this process, would you recommend this project, yay or nay? And explain, does the risk analysis affect your decision? All 3 questions that are going to be part of your electrics case. And then you'd hear the numbers. Okay. Again, you're going to set up a spreadsheet just like we've done last week and earlier. Your WACC calculation. The debt to asset for this firm is 65%. Interest rate is 6%. The risk-free rate is 0.8%. The market premium rate is 6.25%, and the firm's beta is 1.2. I might also add that the company's tax rate is 22%. With that information, you can determine the cost of capital. We had a tab in our spreadsheet 2 weeks ago, last week, and this week that I showed you that you can do that. The project investment is $400,000 over a life of 5 years, with a straight line depreciation of $80,000 a year and a salvage value at the end of its life of $25,000. Working capital base of annual sales is 10%. Expected selling price inflation as variable cost. The fixed operating cost per year increase at 2%. You're going to sell 50,000 units a year at a selling price in year 1 of $35. Your fixed operating costs are 100,000. Your manufacturing or / variable cost per unit is 30 bucks. Now you can do the base case analysis. But then I also have you do a risk analysis. The hits just keep on coming. A scenario analysis with a 20% decrease in sales sold per year, 25% probability. Your base case that we just saw is 50,000 units a year with a 55% probability. And the best case scenario is a 20% increase in sales units at a 20% probability. There's your scenario analysis. Just do your scenario analysis to determine net present value weighted over those scenarios. And then the three sensitivity variables are, what a shock, not too much of a change from the template we've just seen, selling price per unit, manufacturing variable cost per unit, weighted average cost of capital with a plus or minus 10, 20, and 30% deviations. How does this risk analysis affect present value? Please show these calculations. You do not have to show me a chart. If you want to show me the chart to get some extra credit points, please do. But I want to see that analysis of differentials from top to bottom for those three variables, those three sensitive variables based on plus or minus 10, 20, 30% deviation in those three variables. There's your case. A little bit more work than usual. A little bit more interpretation of the data once you get it done. Again, the format is spreadsheet. If you want to write out your answers in a Word or PDF file, that is fine. Or you can include them in your spreadsheet. But word to the wise, just don't write out the answers in the spreadsheet and have it go out 25,000 columns. Incorporate that with a text box in your spreadsheet if you're going to do those answers in your spreadsheet. We have a question. Peter Murray, you should know the answer to that. Let me show you. Here's the analysis we did earlier this evening. That's not it. Here it is. Plus or minus 10, 20, 30, just like that. The same friggin' variables. The dollar amounts are different and the amounts are different. And you have to determine the WACC in your calculations. For extra credit, throw in a little chart like this. I'd be very impressed. There's a look at your scenario analysis. Here's your base case analysis. This is that spreadsheet we looked at last week. Here's your WACC analysis. Fill in the blanks and you can do this problem pretty well. So that is case number 3. 15% of your grade due at midnight next Sunday evening. Good luck and Godspeed. Peter, don't look so excited. This is cool stuff. I'm telling you. I wish I could be you guys doing this stuff. I mean, I'm the guy that's got a grade. I'd rather be doing this stuff. This is, whatever, you guys are going to laugh at me. All right. So there's that. Case number 3. Is this our last case? Let me check my out here. No, we got one more case left. Case number 4 the week later. Oh, case number 4 will be fun. Mergers and acquisitions. Okay. All right. So there's that. 3 weeks to go, ladies and gentlemen, and then you're done. No more. You'll never see Professor Hassey again. Okay. There's that. Not if you don't want to. You can see me anytime you like. All right, let's bring up our old friend, the whiteboard. You know, I teach a lot of courses at our undergraduate level. And a lot of jobs for the seniors this past May who were completing their studies in the pandemic and were graduating from the University of Laverne. Most of the job offers were from temp agencies, temporary agencies. What's a temp agency? Robert Half is a temp agency. Accountants Unlimited is a temp agency. What these companies do is they find work for companies who don't want to hire full-time people. Temp agencies. It's basically leasing people, right? Leasing people. When the economy is lousy today, like now, many companies do not want to spend the capital dollars to buy assets. They don't want to buy new computer equipment. They don't want to buy new computers, telephone systems, buildings, whatever, especially if they don't have the cash flow to pay for it. So what do? They lease. They lease buildings. They lease equipment. They lease computers. I don't know about you guys, but as many years as I have been in business, there's two companies that always ring a bell to me when it comes to leasing. IBM and Xerox. They lease everything. You want a new computer, copier, phone system, mainframe, lease it. Why go out and borrow money or find expensive capital when you can lease it? A lease is another way of getting capital assets. The problem is you don't own it. Somebody else does. So leasing is another capital strategy. The leasing of people, the leasing of equipment, buildings, and as a lot of you can attest, and I did for many years, the only way I could have a roof over my head is I had to lease an apartment. Why? I didn't have the money to buy a house. And also, I didn't have the cash flow to pay the mortgage on a house. But I did have the cash flow to rent or lease an apartment. So I was able to get an asset, a few rooms, an apartment. Now, naturally, I couldn't go in and put in new carpeting. I couldn't buy a new refrigerator. I couldn't even paint the friggin' walls. I had to get the landlord approval. Wendy was in this business for a while. She knows. I had no control over my asset, over my building. That's what you give up when you lease. That's what you give up. When you own, you have control of, you can do anything you want within reason. But leasing is a viable alternative, especially for small businesses. Bank of America. Oh, Bank of America, I need to put in a new telephone system. It's going to cost me $100,000. Could you lend me the money? Get the hell out of here. You're a small business. How are you going to pay me back $100,000? Even at cheap interest rates. Ain't going to happen. So I can go to a company and get what is called an operating lease or a financial lease, also called a capital lease. Oops. How do we want to get those fancy BMWs so we can get the girls, or we look impressive to our homeboys? How can I get a BMW? I can't afford it. I rent it. I lease my car. What's the advantage? I can show the homeboys I got a Beamer. What's the disadvantage? I only better drive 10,000 miles a year and I got to turn it in 3 years. Because in 3 years, they're going to sell that car to somebody else with 30,000 miles on it. If you exceed those miles, you got to pay for it because you're reducing the resale value of that automobile. That's called a capital lease. An operating lease is when you finance a computer, a telephone system, and maintenance. Maintenance is included. That's an operating lease. Okay, you lease a copier. Okay, you can copy 100,000 copies a year. At the same time, part of your lease payment pays for maintenance. So you can beat the hell out of it, call up the Xerox or IBM guy, they come over and they fix it for you. You've already paid for that. A financial lease or a capital lease, the maintenance costs and the operating costs are in addition. You have to pay for them. It's just like when you rent an apartment. Oh, water is included as your lease. We'll pay for the water. Gas, electricity, nada. You pay for that. It's because it's the lease agreement. So we have different types of leases where an operating lease is like for usually smaller things like copiers. Dell for many years leased out computers for many years. They still do, but not as much. Financial leases and capital leases are for big ticket items. Automobiles, heavy duty equipment, buildings. And the key thing about a financial lease is because you're amortizing the full value of the asset. In other words, if an asset costs $1 million, in the lease, the capital lease, you're going to pay that $1 million over the life of that lease. Whereas an operating lease, you can get away with that because it's a smaller ticket item. They want to churn them and burn them. Get some leases together for some copiers and some computers for 2 or 3 years, beat the hell out of them, get the money from as much as you can per the market, and then lease them out again. Scrap them and then give them some more. Capital leases are a little bit different. But the advantage to leasing is what I said earlier. It's being able to get an asset without affecting your credit, your capital structure, your financing. You're not financing it. You're not borrowing money. You're not issuing stock. You're not taking it from your profits. An operating lease is incorporating it into your operating expenses. It's just another expense of doing business. And that's the important thing. And that's the important thing why now temporary agencies are so popular. Because they can lease out people for specific tasks. University of Laverne 10 years ago had a payroll department, a maintenance department, a janitorial department, and a food service. 10 years ago. They're all gone. We all lease them to other companies to manage. Payroll, ADP. Maintenance or housekeeping, food service, even our bookstore. Run by other ventures. We just get a piece of the action. Nice spelling. We get a piece of the action. So lease for many institutions, big and small, can save you money. But the key question for financial strategy is, when is it time to own, not lease? When should you make the decision that now you should hire people full time, pay them the fringe benefits? Now you should purchase those buildings, purchase that equipment. What's the advantage to ownership? Depreciation. Tax write-off. Control. That's the advantage to owning. But it has to come to a point in time where all those three things are to your financial benefit. For most small businesses, they'll always lease. For a lot of us in Southern California, we'll always rent an apartment. I can't afford a house unless I want to live out in who knows where. And then I got to commute 2-3 hours a day. It depends on the market. It depends on the circumstances, but it also depends on the benefits to you, the benefits to the company. So leasing can be a very interesting strategy for a lot of business. I'll give you a real world example. I'm getting old, I can't even forget dates. 1984, I started my company. I didn't have any money. I went to Wells Fargo. Hey, Wells Fargo, I just started a business. Who in the hell are you? I'm Rick Hassey. Get the hell out of here. They didn't lend me a nickel. So I needed office furniture. I needed a place to do business. I needed a computer. Back then, they weren't very fancy anyways. I had to lease everything. I leased office furniture. I leased a small little building in an office complex. I leased my computer. I leased a copier. I'm now in business. I started my company myself. Who was my secretary, my janitor, and everything? My HR person, my wife. We were that way for 3 years. Finally, I was making a profit after 3 years. And that profit began to accumulate. Now I had to have tax write-offs. I was making more money, so I was paying more taxes. So now that's when I decided, the hell with renting everything. I started buying my furniture. I bought my computers. I bought my copiers. I started hiring people. And down the road, I eventually bought my own building. Why? I had tax incentives. I would have been killed if I had kept leasing. Oh, I would have been nailed. So there's a point in time when that takes place. And that's an important thing to remember. And it's just like buying a BMW. You know, I guess I really have to have a BMW, so I'm going to lease it now. But it's going to get maybe a point in your life when you start making enough money and you say, you know what, why am I wasting my money on this BMW with a lease when I can only drive it 10,000 miles a year? I'm going to buy one. I can do whatever I want with it. There comes a point in time when that becomes financially viable. And that's the interesting thing about lease strategies. There's a time at a point in the management of your business where leasing becomes too expensive because you're making a profit. Also, in today's times, when interest rates are so cheap, it's probably cheaper to buy with a debt, with loan, than getting a lease for some things. What's one of the reasons why Hertz decided to declare bankruptcy and Enterprise is near bankruptcy, key big nation's largest rent-a-car companies? Well, about a third of their business is reselling their cars for purchase. In other words, rent the cars for a couple thousand miles and then sell them. Well, because interest rates are so cheap, nobody wanted to buy the Hertz and Enterprise cars for buying. They went and bought those cars directly from the manufacturer and got the cars they wanted with no miles on it. That hurt their business big time, especially Hertz. And they made a couple of bonehead moves. But that's the key thing with leasing. For if any of you are going to be an entrepreneur, you're probably going to lease unless you have a sugar daddy who's financing you or an angel investor. You're going to be tight on money. So you're going to need to lease. But there's a point in the time of the management of your company where leasing is a dumb move because you need the tax write-offs of, depreciation is a tax write-off. It's an operating expense reducing your tax liability. The interest you use to buy those products is a write-off on the interest rate. And you have control on your use of those assets, something you don't have when you're leasing. So those are the key points. Now, I'm not going to give you any case studies on leasing. I'm not going to give you anything like that. We're not going to have any questions or assessments on leasing. But leasing is a good thing to keep in mind as a manager, as a financial strategy. When should I lease and when should I not? What are the alternatives to leasing? Well, why is it important? Why is it not? So that's what I want you to take out of this. Is leasing can be leasing, like bankruptcy, which we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks, is a viable strategy in the right circumstances. But also it can be a bad strategy when you have a lot of profit or a lot of cash flow. You need control of those assets. You need write-offs, tax considerations. That's the key. But for entrepreneurs and startups, it's the way to do it. And also leasing people. I'm not a big advocate of going to temp agencies and leasing people for reasons that it's none of my business to tell you, but I'm not a big advocate of that. But it is a viable strategy for some companies to go out and lease people. I'll just tell you one of my reasons is these people are underpaid. Temp agencies underpay. And then they make money off of you. I'm not a big fan of that. Okay, so that's leasing, chapter 19. But these are the key points of leasing. When to lease, when stay away from it. And that's an important topic. I have also, let me save this, hang on. I have also given you this for any of you to look at it. This is in your week 7 file folder. It's a spreadsheet of determining the advantage of leasing. To purchase a $1.5 million asset or to lease a $1.5 million asset, what is the cheaper method? It's called the net advantage to leasing. We are not going to do this calculation in class, but this is an examination I wanted to show you of you're still doing a net present value analysis of the cash flow of purchasing an asset and leasing an asset. In the case of this example, leasing is cheaper by about $100,000. And the main reason for that is because it's such a short-term asset, 4 years. This is a computer, mainframe. But if you go out longer, the advantage to owning is better. Because why? You can write off the interest on the debt. You can write off and get a tax advantage for the depreciation. And you get an advantage of resale of the asset at the end of its life. Where a lease is just strictly lease payments every year. Yes, you get a tax break on the lease payments because it is an operating expense, but the longer an asset goes out, it's cheaper to own. But again, for short-term assets, it's cheaper. And this is an example. If I would ask you, and I would do this not in this course, in an entrepreneur course, if I had to make a strategy of deciding whether to lease equipment or not for my business, I would use this analysis. It's a discounted cash flow of what is the cash flow of owning versus leasing. And I would compare the two. And based on the tax situation, the depreciation situation, these would all be taken into account. But I'm not going to ask you to do that. You guys got other things to worry about over the next couple of weeks. But that's a little spreadsheet there. Some of you might find that interesting, especially down the line. Okay. So just to wrap things up, we have a case due next Sunday, where you do the entire capital risk analysis. Cost of capital, base case, scenario, sensitivity. You have a template that we've reviewed that you can use. Adapt that template to this situation in this case, and then interpret and answer the questions that I give you. Just tell you, the breakdown of the percentage of the grading, 30% of the grade is you're answering those 3 questions. 70% of the grade is the calculations, doing the analysis. 30% of the case 3 grade is answering those questions. Just so you're aware of that. Don't take those questions lightly. You screw up on those, it'll affect whether you get an A or not. So that's important to know. Next week, our discussions turn to mergers and acquisition and IPOs. Don't really need you to do any reading for that. I'll provide everything for you next week in our Blackboard, so don't worry about even the textbook. The textbook does a lousy job with that. So I'll provide everything for you for our next couple of weeks, especially bankruptcy as well in 2 weeks. So we'll talk about more strategies next week. What's a strategy this week? Leasing. Another strategy next week? Merger. Let's merge with a company. Let's find like economies of scale where we can combine departments and save money. What's another capital strategy? Let's acquire business. Google, Microsoft, Amazon. How did they become huge? Did they come up with those ideas? No, they bought them. They bought them. Acquisitions is a main part of our discussion next week. And then IPOs, initial public offerings, when a company decides to go public and play with the big boys and girls. So that's our discussions next week, but you got a full plate this week. Get case number 3 out of the way. And if I were you, start maybe looking at and working on that Electrics Incorporated. Concentrate on getting your WAC done with and make sure you understand how to calculate that warranty. Get those 2 bigaboos out of the way, you're pretty well home free. Get those WAC and warranty costs understandable, and you'll be in good shape, trust me. And again, as I said, I will not take a look at any of your case 3 work, but as you complete your average case analysis for electrics, send me that analysis and I will review it and let you know you're on the good shape. Next week, I'm trying to have, and not to impress you, but I'm going to try to impress you. Next week, I'm going to try to have a guest speaker to our class. Somebody from a local investment firm, local meaning Pasadena, who is a University of Laverne alumnus, who is a merger and acquisition specialist. Going to have him come and speak to us about mergers and acquisitions. It's going to be difficult with his schedule, and we're working on it now, but if I can't get him to come to class, I'm going to have him to do a video of his lecture to post to us. So that could be kind of cool. All right, everybody. I'm going to hang on in case any of you have any questions or concerns. We are done for the evening. Again, I have recorded this, and it'll be posted tomorrow morning after my golf date tomorrow morning, playing golf tomorrow. All right. Any questions? Who's on the iPhone? Speak. Who's on the iPhone? Who are you?
It's Stephen Pelletier.
Thank
I had
you,
a double
Stephen.
entry.
Oh, I see you, Steve. Okay, thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, I used it for the audio.
Aren't you cool? All right, Teresa, thank you. Good night. Elizabeth, nice to see you. I hope you're feeling okay. Elizabeth, not to get into details, has been a little bit under the weather, and she's with us tonight. So Elizabeth, glad you're here. Hope you're feeling up to par. And you probably got sicker looking at this lecture tonight, so I apologize for that. I guess that's it, everybody. Thanks for everything. Be well this week, and we'll see you next week. Adios.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Week 7. Adios.